doing it for the first time, and I was really excited. So it happened. So let's start again. So hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of Tech Talks with Santosh, and I have a very special guest today, Lars. So let me just try to get his entire name. So it's Lars Gyrup Brink Nielsen. So Lars is yeah. So Lars is a father of 9-year old twin girls. I mean, of course, that's a very difficult job to do. Plus, you are a developer. So, and those twins, they just wrote their first game in JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. That's amazing. And Lars is 34. Is a 34-year-old. He's from Denmark. He's a Danish. He's also a writer editor at indep.dev. He has helped a lot of writers, new writers especially. I can understand. I mean, he has helped me a lot. And in case any one of you who is like want to write for indep.dev, please connect with us. We can work on something. He's an international speaker at meetups and conferences. You might have heard a lot of talks from Lars related to IV. So I'm a big fan of all his talks. Currently, he is working as a front-end architect at System Mate, and he works in energy industry right now. Other from Angular, he is working in CI/CD and Azure and plus .NET. So he has worked on 8 different frameworks. I mean, I cannot work more. I have not worked on more than 2. So he has worked on Knockout, Backbone, Durandal, Angular JS, Kendo UI, Angular React, and Ionic. So that's a great portfolio you have, Lars, and I'm sure people will really enjoy the conversation which we are going to have about monorepos. And I've read your blog post on NX and the where you explained how to use CLI, Angular CLI. So let's go ahead and get started. In case I missed something, please go ahead and introduce Lars.
Thank you, Santosh. Thank you for having me. And hopefully everything is set up correct now.
Thanks to you.
Believe me, I have made a huge mistake like this. So I recently started as a podcast host, and I'll talk a bit about that later. But I made a huge mistake. I had people we were people from 4 different time zones across the world, and I was recording for 35 minutes before I realized that it was only my voice being recorded. So now I have a 35-minute recording of myself speaking a few times, and just a lot of empty audio. So we had to reschedule. It turned out great in the end. So I'll talk about that later. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Santosh. We're glad to be here.
Thank you for joining, Lars. So today's discussion is going to be on monorepos, and I'm a big fan of monorepos because the way it actually eases your development process, and the most important thing is to get entire code, or for example, in case you have an organization and you have multiple code bases, you can just keep it at a single place, right? That's what monorepos is, right? Also, Lars, you can just introduce us or enlighten us more about monorepos.
Yes, okay, so monorepos, first of all, it's not to be confused with a monolith application. Those are not the same thing. So a monorepo is about having several projects in the same GitHub repository or whatever Git provider you're using. Mm-hmm. So we can have both many libraries, like NPM libraries, package libraries published on NPM or a private registry. We can also have multiple applications in the same repository. We can even have both front-end and back-end and serverless. We can have everything in the same repo. And there are, of course, pros and cons of this, and we will discuss this today.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, yeah. So, if I go ahead and talk about the older approach, right? So where, if I remember, before Angular 6 came into existence, we had even single project approach. So where we used to create multiple projects and then we used to struggle. So we might create a library somewhere else, publish it on NPM, then use it. Or otherwise, the other option was Symlink, which is very buggy, I would say. So how you think monorepos helps? I mean, moving from the single project approach.
Okay, so yeah, you were talking specifically about the Angular CLI,
Yeah,
and that in version 6 it started supporting more of a workspace
yeah,
approach.
exactly.
Well, actually, there was the option to have multiple application projects even from the very first version or so, but it was not very easy to do and not well documented. It was definitely a much nicer experience as soon as we got version 6.
Mm-hmm.
And as you and I have discussed and you have spoken a lot about and have a lot of experience with, we also got the schematics and the builders that really helps us out when having many projects in the same repo or the same Angular CLI workspace.
Mm-hmm.
So how can it help us? Well, is it time now that we speak about the differences between the monorepo and
Yes,
the multi-repo approach?
yes, sure.
Okay, so I will use some talking points from by Jeff Cross and Victor
Mm-hmm.
Savkin. They recently did a webinar with ngConf called Never Build the Same Code Twice.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a few points here about the pros and cons of monorepos. So I will respectfully borrow those points from them, and we can speak based on that. So the first upside or pro of a monorepo is that we have atomic changes.
Just the last, I
Make an
think.
up.
Yep, I disconnected. There was some disconnection.
Okay.
I'm sure. Yeah, we are back. Yeah, you're back.
Okay. How long should we back up?
I think just a second, few seconds.
Okay. So the first, I hope that we got on air here that I'm borrowing these pros and cons from Jeff Cross and Victor Savkin from their Never Built the Same Code Twice webinar.
Mm-hmm.
The first upside or pro of a monorepo is that we have atomic changes.
Mm-hmm.
So in a multi-repo approach, we would have to do an update to some shared library, and then we wanted to integrate that into our some application that used that library. So first we publish a version, a package version, on some internal or public NPM package registry or something like that. Then we go into our application project, update the package, but we figure out something is wrong. So now we need another release, a bug fix release from the shared library.
Yeah.
So we get that working and then publish it. And then we go into the application and we run all the tests, and now everything's working fine. But that's a lot of work.
Yep.
So the way that the monorepo is better is, of course, that we can have as this pro. The title of this pro is atomic changes. So we can actually work across the library project and the application project at the same time. We can even make a change in the backend and the front end at the same time. So this is related to the next upside or the next pro of a monorepo is we have shared code.
Yep.
So there's actually no versioning necessary unless we have it's a public library as well.
Mm-hmm.
But many times in especially enterprise setups, we're just using it internally. We don't have any publish package or something like that. But if you have multiple repos, you will be releasing new versions of a shared library all the time. For example, on GitHub private packages or Azure artifacts or something like that. But with this monorepo approach, we don't have to do all that versioning. And is this a breaking change? I have no idea. Okay, we need to bump the major version. Oh, now we have to make a major version and a new release of the application project. No, we have shared code, so we can change it across the backend and the front end if we have to change the shape of some response in the web API on the backend, for example. So no versioning necessary, no internal publishing necessary. Breaking changes are mitigated before any new deployment or release.
Yeah.
So this is a new way of working with our code, and gives us more confidence because we can have tests working in the same branch or pull request. We can have tests that spans across the front end and the back end, and we actually do this in my current project. So it's a big relief.
Yeah.
The third pro of monorepos is that we share a single set of dependencies.
Oh, that's great.
So instead of having many projects and we have to maintain the Angular version, the TypeScript version, the Angular CLI version, the RxJS, and so on, we can upgrade at the same time, and we can test that it works across all of our projects. And then there's less configuration, of course. because we're sharing the same package JSON file.
Yep, that's
So
really good.
this is of course different than a multi-repo.
Mm-hmm.
But like any other solution, of course, there are some downsides as well, or some cons of using a monorepo.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is that we might be running unnecessary tests, and this also goes for lints and builds.
Okay.
So we just made a small change to one file in the code base, and now we have to run 10,000 unit and end-to-end tests, and this can take a few hours. And we really made a very small change. So, so of course, this is a downside of the monorepos, but there's a way around this that we will discuss in a different part of this conversation. The second downside or con of using monorepo is that there are no code boundaries. So of course, because we have the shared code base, we can import and use any part of the whole monorepo. So now we are importing parts of the code that we shouldn't really be using, but maybe we don't know, or we don't understand, or don't see why this is bad. So we can make mistakes that will break the whole thing without at runtime, or we don't have good test coverage. So this is another risk of using the monorepo, but also something you can get around, and another point we will be talking about also. Okay. The last con of a monorepo is that it has inconsistent tooling. So this is related to what we were discussing, that instead of having a single set of dependencies, now we have 5 different versions of Angular CLI and TypeScript and TS-lint and all of that. And maybe we use multiple frameworks. Maybe we have both React and Angular and Nest.js or Next.js, and they all use different tools. And now we have like so many dependencies to maintain and take care of. And we, even if we're using the same tools, we have to have multiple configurations, one for each repo. So that's a lot of maintenance. And how do you update that across repos? Well, it can be a long change request for that.
Yeah, I know. So we will be again in a dependency hell.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. I believe everyone working with large projects could have experienced this at some point.
So I mean, just to relate, you just said, right, whenever we had a single project approach, we have to always deploy and check if it works or not. So in my previous project, it was similar to that. We had actually 4 different packages, which we used to bundle differently. Then we used to deploy it on our on-premises. We had something like JFrog server, and then we used to download it and check if it works. So it's always like you have to release with a beta version, then check if it works, again update the version, then download it again, and that was really tedious to do. I hope I was aware of Monorepos back then in 2017, because NX was there, I think, back in 2017 as well. Yeah, so
of course we can use npm link, as you mentioned, but that's also very difficult to work correctly.
Yeah, so I mean the problem with Symlink or npm link is, of course, you know how to use it, but once you give it to the developers, they will make faces. Why should I do this? I mean, there should be better way to do it. They are like, you are the one who is building it, so give us this in a better way. Same experience as Angular CLI gives us. I was like, I'm not a god. So of course I can do little bit from my side, but this is the best we can do. But yeah, I mean, Monorepos has actually helped us a lot. I mean, all these problems are gone, and I think this is where we can move on to the different solutions. Maybe we can discuss about the different solutions out there. So we had before NX came in, I think Angular CLI was already there, but it never had the monorepo approach, and then they added it, and then we had something known as lerna, which I came to know from Serkan, because we were discussing. So Serkan mentioned that there is another approach we can use. So I was like, are you serious? Because I'm not aware of any. He's like, yes, there is something called lerna. So let's start with maybe NX, then Angular monorepo, and we will discuss lerna at the end.
Okay, so NX, of course, is an open source toolchain developed by Narwhal, which we know very well in the Angular ecosystem. But actually, NX is a toolchain for working across frameworks, both in the front end and the back end, and more frameworks and tools are being supported out of the box. And as you know, we can extend it with NX plugins. If we have some other tooling we want to integrate, we can do it ourselves with a little bit of work.
Mm-hmm.
So NX is mono-repo first.
Mm-hmm.
So they really want us to use the mono-repo approach, and this is based on Victor Safkin and Jeff Cross's experiences while working at Google.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Microsoft and Facebook have a lot of mono-repos as well. So their tagline for this project, or for Narwhal in general, is work like Facebook, Microsoft, and Google. But why would we need to do that? I'm just a small shop or a medium-sized project. I'm not Google. Why would I need this? Well, so this is kind of of course, this is a reasonable thought or reasonable response when you first hear about this. I'm not Google. Why would I need this?
Yep, exactly.
But actually, once you get a solution that works great across many teams and many developers, there's a good chance that this is also a good solution for even a small team or medium-sized organization.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, for really small projects like landing pages or some short-lived products or websites, this can be overkill and over-engineering. But as soon as you have something with just maybe 5 developers and you're going to be developing on this for at least 2 years, you might be very happy if you choose this tool chain. Mm-hmm. So there's more to it than just a set of tools. There's a lot of discipline involved as well. Mm-hmm. And so I spoke about the cons or the downsides of a mono-repo, and the NX toolchain addresses each of those. I think we will discuss that in a moment when we go to how is NX different from the other solutions. Mm-hmm. But basically, NX, you can have multiple projects in the same repository, and this can be workspace libraries, this can be applications, it can be front end, it can be back end, it can even be tooling, a set of tools for automated tasks, or and of course we have all the configurations for lint rules and setup of tests, frameworks, and all that.
Okay. So it's like you have your applications, you can create your tools, keep it inside the same workspace, just like Angular CLI does, and then of course libraries and backends. Okay, so let's move on to Angular Monorepo. So that's something which is released after Angular 6, and now a lot of people do use it. So let's discuss about it.
Okay, so the Angular workspace approach is the same thing. You can have out of the box, you get the option to create new applications or new libraries.
Yep.
However, the libraries in Angular CLI projects are meant to be primarily published to NPM. Mm-hmm. And then instead of using something like NPM link or symlink, it will use the TypeScript path mappings. But then out of the box, you have to compile the library into the dist folder, and then you can use it in your application project. But you don't want to make that part of your source code repository. So you have to do that every time. You have to make sure, did I build the latest version of the library? Or you might get some nasty surprises or don't understand why it's not working. I have the code right here. Why can't I use it? So this is the Angular out-of-the-box experience. So this is one of the examples of where NX is different, because it has a generator for like what I call workspace libraries. So libraries that are not meant to be published on NPM, only used in the other projects in your workspace or your monorepo. So here we will directly reference the source code of the library, and that means we don't have to build and compile it before using it. But instead, we will have kind of an index.ts or public API.ts, which tells the other projects in this workspace which classes and constants and so on can you use from this library. And this is where we can get into trouble but all the code is there. I have code sharing, so I can just use anything from internals of this library, right? So we need this. This means we need a lot of discipline to live up to these rules and not make mistakes. But anyways, out of the box, you get publishable libraries and you get applications. That's it for the Angular CLI.
As a Spider-Man in movie, it was mentioned, right? So with more power comes more responsibility. So of course everything is available to you, but you have to be you have to make sure where your boundaries are. So
Listen
that's
to Uncle Ben.
yeah. Okay, so the next solution which we had was Lerna. So I spoke to Serkan about how it can be implemented. So I would say Lerna and NX. So I found the little bit similarities because if you go to NX, we have nx.json file available. Similarly in Lerna also has one configuration file available. The one downside of Lerna which I find out that they have their own dependencies. So if I have multiple projects, 5 different projects, so 5 different projects will maintain their own dependency. You have to actually tell your configuration file where my packages would be, and then it will select the package.json from there. So that was one overhead, but I think I'm sure Serkan is listening to us, and don't hate us. We love Lerna. I love Lerna. So, but yeah, it was a great solution. I think when NX was not there, I was just reading the release notes, the recent release notes. So the good thing is now you can actually convert your Lerna's workspace, Lerna mono-repo, to NX. I think that will actually help a lot of developers, because I can still see a lot of developers who used to have JavaScript and they have mono-repo approach. They are still using Lerna, and I think moving on to NX gives them more power and more advantages, as we are going to discuss about, and few we already discussed. So that's something which Lerna does.
So I don't want to speak too much about Lerna because I have no experience, so I will only speak from a few things I read about it.
Mm-hmm.
So even today, even Narwhal says that Lerna is a different thing, and now NX is not primarily intended for package libraries, so things you want to publish on NPM. Lerna might actually be better for that.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that with Lerna you have each project has its own package JSON, for example.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, one of the downsides of a multi-repo approach. So why would we want that in a mono-repo approach, which Lerna is? Well, okay, so with the Angular CLI workspace solution, it can actually be difficult to maintain if you have an NPM library in there, it can be difficult to figure out, so which peer dependencies does my library have? Because there is a small ng packager JSON config or package JSON config or something like that, where you list the dependencies the consumers need to use your library from NPM. But it's JSON file with all the dependencies in there, you will not actually realize that you were missing to mention something in your library package JSON unless you actually build the application and have a different place where you import it and try to install only the dependencies listed in your package JSON and figure out whether everything people need is mentioned in there. And then comes on top of that the difference between package dependencies and peer dependencies. That I don't really want to discuss today because this could take all night. But anyways, Lerna makes it easier to maintain your dependencies, but then you don't get the upside of having just one set of dependencies.
Exactly.
Lerna also uses it actually uses npm link with symlinks, and it uses Yarn workspaces also to give you that experience of you can import directly from the source code instead of having to build each one. I think. I don't know for sure, but I think I read this about Lerna. So it could be a good solution as well. But if you're doing application development and not an open source library, NX is probably a better solution for you.
Yeah, as Serkan already mentioned, so he said Lerna is good choice for in case you have you are creating libraries and publishing it on npm. So agreed, Serkan. So okay, so now we can discuss about how NX is different. So we now discuss about Lerna, NX, and Monorepos. Now where NX shines basically.
Okay, so let me get back to the downsides of monorepos, because Narwhal with the NX toolchain and their way of thinking in monorepos tries to address each of those downsides. So the first one was running unnecessary tests and builds and lints. So they try to mitigate this by using what some people call smart tests.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where instead of having to run all the tests from the entire project, because this could be tens of thousands of tests, the NX CLI has a dependency graph. So it can figure out which of each of the project depends on each other. So that when we make a change in just this one library down here, and there's dependencies on top of that using it, it knows that, okay, we have to run the test for this library, but also for this application using this library, maybe another library and another application as well. So we can run what they call affected tests, which is based on this project dependencies graph. And we can do that for tests, we can do that for builds, we can do that for lints, and we can even use it for smart deploys, so that we don't have to redeploy everything, only what's affected by a change. And it uses Git actually to figure out what has changed. So it's very smart indeed. They did a lot of work to make this work really well. Of course, to get the most benefit from this, we really have to split our code into very small application projects, very small library projects, because the dependency graph only knows about the public API and whether any of the other projects are importing from this public API. If everything is in one or two libraries, you then don't get this benefit, because it doesn't really know what's behind the public API and which parts you are using. So it's not like you're testing only the small parts of each project. No, you're running all the tests for each project at a time. So the smaller projects we have, the more benefit we will get from this smart test, smart build, smart lint, smart deploy.
That's really great. I mean, I think Guru Raj had a question that by using monorepos will increase the build time. I think this answers the question, because even not the build time, here we are talking about your testing time. We are talking about the time you invest in your linting rules. So everything is saved.
Definitely. And on top of this, NX has this paid product called NX Cloud, and caching of builds. But it can be used locally as well without you having to pay for anything. Okay. So if nothing has changed in a library, but you have built it previously on your developer machine, it can instantly give you the build output or the lint or the test output of that. But again, we need to split it into smaller projects to get a benefit from this. But if you buy the NX Cloud product, and there's some free there's a free tier, or you can use it X amount of build time hours saved per month or something like that. Okay. But then you can have the cache across machines, so across the CI and your developer machine and your colleague's developer machine. So this is really great. If you come into the project and for the first time and you run a test or build, everything that hasn't changed will be instantly or just in a few seconds, instead of having to go through the whole build and lint. You will see that nothing's broken, or this test is broken, or something like that. So another very intelligent tool by Narwhal, and you can use it just on your machine without the NX Cloud option.
That's really great, because that's the one of the biggest pain which we have, like whenever we are onboarding a new developer, right? So you have to go ahead and sit with him, guide him for like entire week, or in worst case, but in best case you can actually go do that in one day. But I think that developer time is also saved, right, by using the NX Cloud. That's really great.
The second con here that we have with monorepos was no code boundaries. So this is the thing, we can just import everything from all projects since they're in the same code base. So how would we know that we're not supposed to use that? The thing about Uncle Ben, great powers comes great responsibilities. So what does NX do about this? Well, it sets up this dependency graph that we already discussed, and then you can configure your own rules. You can give tags to the different projects saying this is the superhero team is the owner of this repo, and they can only use code from other projects which are owned by the superhero team. Or maybe this is tagged with the admin app of the project, and this is the customer app of the project, and then we can. So that's slicing in terms of applications. We can also slice it or tag it in terms of domains. So that each domain can only be dependent on its own domain, or maybe one other, or a shared domain, or something like that. So we can make it as granular as we really want. We can even add the horizontal layers on top of that. And NX has a set of recommended library types. For example, a UI library, a feature library, and what are the other ones? I forget all the time.
Shell?
The utility libraries and a few others.
Shell library you're talking?
Yes. Okay. So also the feature shell library that I wrote an article with, or it was mostly Nacho Vasquez. I just helped him a little bit, and this is a great article about the different styles of shell libraries, which can kind of be the main entry point into an application or a domain. So it can be used across applications, or it can be so that you don't have to change anything ever, basically, in your Angular application project. And as long as you're not touching anything in the Angular application project, less things can go wrong. So that's very good. If you never touch the application project, but then you know the configuration, everything is working. So yeah, this is another approach. But anyways, if we use these different types of libraries, we can also say a feature library can only depend on a UI library and a utility library, for example. So we can configure our own rules for which projects can import from each other. And then we can use the NX Workspace lint tool to make sure that no one has crossed or made an import that they were not supposed to. So this is very powerful. We have it in our projects so that it breaks the build. So you will never be allowed to deploy or merge anything that crosses these rules.
That's really great. I mean, I think it takes care of multiple issues which we have with monorepos. For example, one which I just came into my mind was circular dependency. So I have been into that situation that there was a circular dependency, and it takes a lot of time to actually figure out where is that, because of course with latest IV and everything, it's possible to figure out the line number, but in earlier days it was not possible to figure out where something is going wrong, because it used to work in JIT mode, if you remember. It only used to break once you do production build, and suddenly you have some circular dependency. So we will never get into circular dependency if we are breaking to the granular level. And second is, of course, we cannot control what the developers can use. So if you have features library, as Lars said, you can actually go ahead and say, okay, you cannot access this. This is something which should be accessible to, let's say, admin. It's not available to you, so don't try to use it. That's really great.
Yes, and I don't know if it's the Angular or the NX toolchain that actually detects the circular dependency. I guess both of them can, but I know for a fact that the NX toolchain is very good at detecting them very fast, these circular dependencies. And with the lint rules, as soon as you write the import statement, it will tell you are breaking the rules. So then you need to think twice.
Yeah, that's really great.
And for the cyclic dependencies, I don't remember whether it tells you right away while you're writing the code. But it'll definitely show up very quickly with the lint rules.
That's amazing.
So the third downside of a monorepo was inconsistent tooling. So the way NX approaches this is maybe inspired by Angular. So with Angular, you get like batteries included. Here's everything you need, all the tools and configurations, just by using what's it called, ng-new, my workspace. So it's the same with NX. You can create create NX workspace, then you can use the blank template or an Angular preset template or React or whatever. And then they have a set of recommended tools for each framework. So With Angular CLI, the recommended tool for testing, for example, is Karma and Jasmine.
Mm-hmm.
With NX, the default recommended one is Cypress and Jest. And for a lot of projects, instead of TS-lint, it's ES-lint.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a recommended set of tools, which is nice because then you can use the same tools across frameworks and across backend and frontend. And they have these schematics that comes out of the box with NX CLI
Mm-hmm.
that can set everything up for you, and you can even reuse some of the same configuration so that you only have to configure it once across the projects.
Oh, that's good.
So that was it. How is NX better? There's probably a lot of other things,
Yeah.
but those were some of the great features, and hopefully you can all relate to how that's useful now that we discussed the pros and the cons of mono-repo versus multi-repo setup.
Yep, definitely, Lars. So I think a lot of good points that, of course, when you are moving from a normal monorepo approach to the NX, the advantage is you are saving a lot of time, a lot of build time, developers time. It includes, because for the big organization, the time is money. So the less time you invest on CI/CD pipeline or setting up things on your laptop, it will save that much time for the organization, and your productivity will increase for sure. And I think I was just reading somewhere that you can also use the .NET pipeline with NX. Is that true? .NET CI/CD pipeline.
I don't know. I mean, we use .NET, but we don't use NX for NX CLI for any .NET. I don't know if there's any builders out there for .NET yet.
Okay.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can convince our backend developers to use NX, but we could definitely use it in the CI pipeline.
Yeah. Okay.
And in the shared project between backend and frontend.
Yep. Okay. So I think there was a blog post from you. So let's come to that. So you had written 2 blog posts, if I remember. So there was one from I think Nacho, where you helped him to create. That was something around shell libraries. So can you just tell us about shell libraries? What are those and how they are helpful?
Wow, this is a really advanced topic, but I think we spoke a little about it, that they are the entry point library to either a single app or a set of features or domain that can be shared between one or more apps.
Okay.
So this is where you would set up, usually this is where you would set up routing and the root or top level configuration of something like NX or NGRX, something like NGRX store, NGRX side effects and something like that. Yeah, I don't really want to go into too much detail. This is a very advanced topic, but this is a very popular article about the feature shell library. I don't remember the title. It's something with shell library patterns with NX and Angular monorepos. Yeah. Very great article. It still gets a ton of views every month, and it's even linked from the official README file in the NX repo. And then you mentioned another one that I wrote myself. This was about tiny Angular application projects. Yeah. So I tried, because of this thing I mentioned, where if we can prevent touching the application project, so the one that has the main TS file and the polyfills and all that, if we can stop developers from touching that project, it will be more difficult to make mistakes, and we can feel pretty confident about the application working, and it will not, a lot of things will not break. So I took whatever you get when you do ng generate application, and I looked what's in there, and there's let's see if I can remember this. Of course, there's the main file. This should still stay in the application project, but then there's a style CSS or SCSS or whatever. We can actually extract that into a workspace library with just the styles, and then we can even have some shared styles, for example, some SAS partials that we can share between projects, and we can use them in, for example, we might have some tests in a UI library that depends on the global styles, but a library is not supposed to import from an application project.
Mm-hmm.
So it couldn't really use the global styles if they were in the application project. So it makes sense to put it down here in another library, because then we can allow them to import from each other or one from the other. And that can be used if we have some tests that will actually verify the style or the look and feel of our components.
Mm-hmm.
We can also reuse them in Storybook if we have Storybook instances, which we also use. So there's a shared styles, a workspace library you can create, and there are a few others. Let's see if I can remember. What else is in there? Environments. We can use an environments shared workspace library, and it's just the environment files that you know that comes out of the box with Angular, a development one and a production one, and you can add additional ones, configurations, static configurations. So they are build time configurations, which is not really useful for example, feature flags, because then you need to make a deploy to turn on a feature, which is not very nice in a modern approach of CI and CD. But anyways, the reason for doing this is that you can test it individually. But also, you might need to. So if you have your feature shell library over here, and it might need to determine, is this development mode or production mode? So it would import the environment's configuration. But if that environment's configuration is living up here in an application project, again, you're not supposed to go up the stream to import something. You are not even allowed to do that with our workspace configuration rules. So we need to put it down here in another shared workspace library, an environments workspace library. And now you're allowed to import, and that will be necessary if you're using the for root and for child or for root and for feature pattern, which NGRX uses. So if you want, for example, to conditionally enable the developer tools for NGRX, you would need this shared environments library.
Okay, that's great.
There's a third one. Let's see if I can remember, or I will have to look up my own article, which is another good thing about writing articles.
Exactly.
If you forget, you can't possibly remember all of this all the time. I mean, do you remember, Santosh, or I will just quickly look it up?
I mean, there was 5 series part, so I could read till 3rd part. I still have to finish 2 more.
Oh yeah, this is another thing entirely, the 5-part tutorial series. But in this tiny Angular application projects in NX workspaces, let's see here, there is the an assets workspace library was the last one. So this is where we have something like icons and web fonts and stuff like that. And again, there's a few reasons you might want to extract that, but one important one is you don't really want to touch that application project. This is a very special project that has the main file. You should really not be touching that very often. But if a designer or UX developer or something like that wants to add an icon, it would be really bad if they needed to touch the main application project. So yeah, read the article. It goes into details about how to do it and why you would do it and examples of where it's useful. So we're coming up on our time, I guess. Should we discuss the 5-part tutorial series about workspaces?
I think we can just share the link in the chat, and the people can go through. But I think this is where one of the main advantage which I have seen from using your 5-part series, right, which you wrote about .NET CLI and the shell libraries. So I think you had referred many things from shell libraries and tried to compare that how you can actually do the same stuffs using the .NET CLI itself. Not .NET, Angular CLI itself. And one of the advantage which I was able to get was, in normal libraries you cannot have routing, but using shell library and the 5-part series which you wrote, we were actually able to configure the URLs or routings inside the library. That was the major advantage, I think, of both the patterns which you wrote.
Yes, so you can split your routing into multiple libraries. That's where the the shell libraries or feature shell libraries come into place.
Mm-hmm.
In this tutorial series, we are discussing, I don't even remember the title myself, but it's something like NX style workspaces using the Angular CLI.
Mm-hmm.
So here, okay, so I got a lot of questions about, okay, so this NX workspace structure is really nice, but I can't really convince my boss or my team to use NX. So how could I use it just with the Angular CLI? Because of course you're using the Angular CLI. Well, Angular CLI is very flexible because of builders and schematics and configurations. So I figured, well, we can just use the same structure and just configure ourselves out of it.
Yep.
But of course, that's a little difficult to do because then you really need to understand the tools and the configurations.
Exactly.
So I made a very long series, a 5-part series. It'll take you full days to get through this. Only a few people have actually done it. So good luck. There's 5 different parts, and each part will take several hours to complete. But it's a step-by-step of how to setting up everything. I mean, there's probably around 14 projects. There's not a lot of code in it. It's mostly about the structure and a few simple examples to make you understand what would fit into this type of library. So I can quickly have a look here at the repo, and you can go look yourself. We will share the links for the article, and there's a full repo so that you can see the end result. But following the tutorial series, you can do this yourself with just the Angular CLI. So there's 2 applications in there. There's the check-in and the booking application, but actually there's a mobile and a desktop version of each of them. So it's actually 4 applications and 4 end-to-end test suites for these 4 application projects. Then there's a bunch of libraries. They are grouped into the booking domain, the check-in domain, and then a shared piece that has inside of the shared folder, you have a data access library, shared one, the environments, and then you have a shared domain, which is the seat map, which is used in both applications, the check-in and the booking one. Then we have a UI, shared UI buttons library. So this is where we would share our button components. In a real project, it would maybe be more than just buttons. It would be, for example, the so-called atoms of our project or our design system or UI component library. Then there's a UI or utilities formatting library in the shared one. And in the check-in, we have this feature shell library and a data access library. And in the booking, we have data access, flight search feature library, and passenger info feature library, and then the feature shell library. So all these things we discussed, you can have a look yourself in the code, or you can follow this tutorial and you will learn a lot about the structure and flexibility of the Angular workspace and all the configurations you use. And we end up during that tutorial actually building our own schematics, but it's more using a command line and script approach, because schematics are, they are pretty difficult to learn, and I really have a huge admiration for you because you know a lot about them, and I'm not really a compiler guy, and you have to work with all the TypeScript APIs, which could be better documented.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, I've already shared those 5 series article on the chat. You can refer it from there. So that I think you will more than actually code, you will come to know about how you can actually do that using the CLIs and different tools. So that's really interesting. So I think we have let's move on to a few questions, and then we can discuss about your upcoming podcast.
You will have to read for me because I can't see the chat.
I'll do that. I'll do that. So we actually I received few questions on LinkedIn. So so let me just read it. So what is the best way to handle dependencies in Monorepo? Should we have a package.json file in every individual project in a Monorepo, or one package.json file for all projects? If we have one package.json file for all projects, will that make it difficult to handle dependencies?
So we already discussed some of this. So with NX, definitely you have a single package JSON, which means you will upgrade Angular for example, at the same time across all your projects. So of course, that's more effort because you have to operate all the applications and migrate them at the same time. But it's a lot better than being stuck in one of the applications on an old version of Angular and then, oh, now it can't use the shared library because that requires the newest version of Angular as well. So you really have to plan for these things. So it could be a several days project. So you really have to think about it and estimate it and make sure to have enough time, because I know some people are saying we upgraded to Angular 9 or 10 in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
It can actually take days based on how complex your whole CI/CD process is set up, because we have to upgrade to Node 12 at the same time, and the backend uses a different version of Node, so now we have to upgrade the backend tooling as well. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that can you have to take into account when upgrading Angular. So NX uses the one package JSON file, except if you have publishable libraries that you mean to put out on NPM, and this is where you have to maintain the individual package JSON files with the dependencies, direct dependencies, and peer dependencies yourself. And you really don't know for sure without actually building the library and then trying to import it in a different project. So NX is not very good for libraries. Lerna might be better at this. And Lerna uses multiple package JSONs. But then you have to synchronize the same libraries between all of those package JSONs.
Exactly. Okay, so I think the next two questions are I think we have already talked about it. One was related to the bundle size of application. So I think NX takes care of all the issues because I think it is related to, does having all the projects in one therefore affect the bundle size of application? So I think it depends, right, in how big application is. So
bundle size shouldn't really make a difference. It shouldn't, because we have tree shaking. So that's the same in a mono-repo and in a multi-repo setup.
Okay.
So as long as you're using Angular CLI with the default configuration, you don't have anything to worry about. Or even the NX CLI, which uses Angular CLI under the hood.
Agreed. So deployment of apps takes a lot of time as all applications are deploying together. Is there any way to fasten the deployment process?
Yes, so you can use the affected build and the affected test, affected lint. So the way we do it is in a PR branch. So if you want to merge into the main branch with a PR from another feature branch, then we run, every commit we make until the merge, we just run the affected build. But then during the merge to the main branch, we will run every test just to make sure. But I guess you could do smart deploy, so that you're only building and deploying things which actually had dependencies that changed. So NX can help you set up whatever strategy you want for this. We really wanted to make sure to run all the tests just in case, as soon as we're merging something into master or the main branch, and then of course we are deploying from that main branch, and then I guess at that point we could use the smart build and deploy even then, because you can set up, you can say I want to compare it to the latest or the commit before this one, and then you can see, okay, this was a change that affected the booking app, so we need to build and deploy the booking app.
Okay.
So we don't have to deploy everything at once. This is another place where NX can help us out.
That's great. Okay, I think Guru Raj had a question. After mono-repos, can you ask him what his thoughts on shared repos? Any idea about shared repos, Lars?
What is shared repositories?
I think he's just asking about the same, maybe the code which will be shared across multiple applications. I think so. Guru Raj, if you are online, can you just...
Okay, so maybe one example could be like using Git submodules, so that you're basically linking different Git repositories together, but now you have the same synchronization maintenance nightmare where you have to keep updating from the shared Git repository at the same time. So you don't have the versioning and the release things unless you do tags. tag a release saying this is version 1, but I'm not publishing it anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could go in the application repos or whatever and say, okay, now I want to synchronize this Git submodule for the version 1.0 tag release of this shared Git repo. But I personally prefer the mono-repo approach at this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next question is again from Gururaj. How can we deploy mono-repo projects in CI/CD pipeline? So I think it's more on deploying the individual application, I think.
Yes. Okay, so even though they are in the same mono-repo, in the same Git repository, they are buildable and deployable individually. So you could see in this tutorial I wrote, each application, and there are 4 of them, can be built and deployed individually. So you can build and deploy the desktop booking app, the desktop, the mobile booking app, the desktop check-in, and the mobile check-in application. Each one has a separate build target, and you can set up a separate deploy pipeline for it.
That's great.
So we in the project, I call it a project. We have to be careful with these terms, but in the system I'm working on, we have 3 applications living in the same mono-repo, and we are lucky that their deployment pipelines are similar, except for a few. They live in 3 different cloud environments, all in Azure, but so they are similar. They just need to deploy to a different host or something like that. Okay. So that will be part of the secrets. There's a key vault store in Azure that we kind of have these environmental aware variables, and we cannot even see them as developers. They live in this key vault of secrets, but the deploy agent can read them so that they can figure out where and how to deploy.
That's great. So next question is from Sorish Datta. So his question is, is it recommended to use Monorepo for Microfrontend applications?
Microfrontends, I guess, depends on how we define microfrontends. What we did in our system is that because we have multiple teams working in the same monorepo, at least for the application. So there's the front-end application, so the Angular application. There's also a shared, within the same monorepo is the backend, which is a C# ASP.NET MVC core backend. There's 3 of them as well, but they also live in the same solution, in the same monorepo. So when we have multiple teams, maybe 4 or 5 teams working on the same code base, what was the question again?
Yeah, it is related to so is it recommended to use Monorepo for front-end application?
Microfrontend.
Yeah,
right.
Microfrontend.
Yes, okay. So now we have different teams working. So we split it into these domains or features, whatever you want to call them. And each team owns a set of domains. So using the feature shell approach, each project or each of these domains can actually be kind of an Angular application, but since they are bundled or called from the single or maybe a few Angular projects or Angular application projects, they are not really microfrontends, but we do have the concept of each team can work in isolation from the other teams, and everything will be orchestrated and bundled in the same and deployed in the same application. So we get a lot of the benefits. Of course, then we can't use more than one framework, but we have decided to only use Angular, so that makes sense for us. We could have chosen a more real microfrontend thing where you're actually building individual pieces of script that can be embedded or included or orchestrated in the same page or the same application. For example, if you want to combine Angular, React, Vue, Svelte, whatever, multiple of these options, that would be a lot of more complexity then. Of course, what you needed then is now you need some kind of a message bus to communicate between the microfrontends. You could use something like NGRX for this, but what are you going to do in React then? So or svelte. Well, you could use something that works across them, but actually you shouldn't. In a perfect world, you shouldn't really need to communicate much between them, anyways. Only the shared pieces of state, like the user profile and the set of claims and permissions the user has, and something like that. But you definitely need some central channel for communicating between them, whatever that is. Maybe it's RxJS subjects, maybe it's some other event bus library, but it adds some complexity, and you also have to orchestrate, like, this piece of this microfrontend sits here and that this one sits here, and they have to be loaded at the correct times. So if you're only using Angular, definitely just use the workspace, NX workspace approach, because you can have the benefit of each team working in isolation, or they only have to agree on a few shared things and coordinate that. But for the most part, they can just worry about their domain or their set of feature and UI libraries and so on, which is really nice.
Great. So I think we'll take one more question, the last question. We have already been live for more than 1 hour now. So I've never used. So this is again from Gaurav Dasgupta. So he says I have never used and thought from the perspective of monorepo architecture. So how should I realize that me and my team needs monorepo architecture?
Yes. Okay. So my opinion is, of course, for small projects or short-lived projects, you don't really need it. Just to use whatever comes out of the box, the Angular CLI or the Create React app or whatever. But as soon as you have a project that you will be working on and maintaining for several years, you should definitely look into mono-repos. It will save you a lot of pains that we have discussed today. So maybe the biggest challenge would be convince your boss or convince your team that you actually need this. But then you need to mention some of these downsides, because you can relate to this, Santosh. Now we have to release a version of the shared library and try it out in the application.
Right.
Oh, something's broken. Now we need to make another release. So now you have multiple tickets just for,
same issue.
One small change, really. And you have to coordinate that change across the teams instead of just being able to do the whole thing yourself in the mono-repo. Very powerful.
Yeah.
And you get all these tools on top of it with NX, the dependency graph, so you can do smart tests and enforce the architectural boundaries of the domains and types of libraries and the layers and all that.
Cool. So I think we are done. I hope you learned something new about monorepos, and you can convince your boss and say, okay, let's use NX, because that's the best solution. I think we are also planning to use NX in our project. We are actually doing some POC, so we can actually take it to the management team and then convince them that okay, this is something which we need. Anyways, so let's move on. So Lars, do you want to promote something? I mean, if I've heard about your podcast, we already have 2 episodes released. So you want to say something about it?
Yes, I'm not really a self-employed consultant, so I don't have any workshop or something to sell to you. So I would just ask you to read my articles, and maybe the most recent thing I have started doing is this podcast. So it's related, or it's sponsored by indepth.dev. So it's called The Deep Dive, so is the in-depth newsletter. There's a newsletter which comes out with recommendations each month, both from the in-depth blog and other places on the web, some interesting articles. And now we have this podcast as well. The first episode was with Michael Lotke about it was really a hardcore episode about rendering and change detection optimizations in Angular. But the podcast is not like this talk show. It's not only about Angular.
Yeah.
So the second episode was related to Angular with you as a guest.
Yeah.
This was about schematics and builders and NX plugins. But as we have discussed today, this can be useful outside of Angular projects in React or Nest or Next or Gatsby or Node.js Nest.js, all these things that's supported by NX. And even if something's not supported, you can add your own tool chain pretty easily.
Yep. Thank
The
you.
third episode is not on air yet.
Mhm.
I still need to edit it, but it's a really great one with, I believe we have 5 or 6 different people discussing coming from Angular development and learning React development, and the other way around, coming from Angular or React development background and coming into the Angular ecosystem. What's that experience like,
Mhm.
and how do they compare to each other, and what's the biggest challenge in terms of learning the other frameworks? So this is a really interesting episode. I look forward to publishing that within the next few weeks.
Cool. So, can you tell us where it is available? The deep dive podcast.
So it is listed on every
Mhm.
podcast publishing platform, but a lot of podcasts are called the deep dive or
Yeah.
something like that, deep dive.
Mhm.
So the easiest way to find it is the website. It's called the deepdive.simplecast.com. This is a website service for podcasts.
Okay.
So there's a page per episode, and you
Okay.
can listen to it directly in your browser, or you can there's a button that says subscribe or something, and you can find the link for whatever service you're using, iTunes or Google Podcasts or something like that.
Mhm. That's nice.
And so yeah, it's a really nice service and very cheap.
Cool. So we also posted it on social media that in case you have written some blog post on Monorepos. So we got 2 entries. So one is from one is about publishing npm libraries using NX and GitHub Actions. So I'm sharing this on in the chat window, so you can refer. I'll be sharing it on my social media as well, so you can refer. And second one was written by Devin Shoemaker. So in case you are into NX, you might know this guy because he's been writing few amazing NX plugins. So he has written something for build cross-platform application in Monorepo with NX, Ionic and Capacitor. So I'm sharing that link as well. You can actually refer to this to blog post and learn something new about NX. So I think this is it for the day. We had a great chat with Lars related to Monorepos. We discussed about a lot of things and how where NX is very powerful and how it can help you save a lot of time. And in case you have any questions, I'm sure you can reach out to us anytime. Lars, would you like to share your Twitter handle?
So it's lazy DK, and DK is for Denmark.
Oh,
So I will spell it. It's LAYZEEDK.
yep.
So
Okay.
lazy is it's not because I'm lazy. Or a lot of developers are, but that's not the reason for the name. I will not say that I'm not lazy, but it's just a nickname I got from, a long time ago when I was young. And some people still call me that, and feel free to call me lazy. I won't be offended.
Cool. I've shared the your Twitter handle as well in the chat, so people can reach out to you, and in case they have any question, they can share, or they can also use the community page on InDepth. We have a lot of questions being asked there as well, so you can always feel free to post your questions. And Lars keeps an eye for all the questions coming from the community. I've seen that, so of course they will be answered. So thank you.
I hope people are happy. We spend a lot of time answering people's questions in there pretty fast.
Sure. So I think, of course, I mean, this is something people can refer and show it to their managers as well. That look, this is where NX shines, and we should use it. So that's really great. So thank you, Lars. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your time, especially. So we had few initial hiccups, but I think the community was really supportive. They said, okay, this is something wrong, and we were able to fix everything in a quick time. So next time we will be streaming it on Twitch as well as YouTube, and we will be using StreamYard, so we will not have any issues. So this was the first episode, and looking forward to serve you great contents in future. Thank you, Lars.
Thank you, Santosh, and thank you to all the viewers for spending your time with us. I hope you found it interesting. Go through the resources to learn more about all of this stuff.